For more on Netanyahu's address, let's bring in Michael Oren now. He's former Israeli ambassador to the United States, live for us in Jaffa, Israel. Michael, this speech taking place amid growing backlash from those furious about Israel's attacks in Gaza that have killed almost 40,000 Palestinians. What's your view? Did Netanyahu go far enough to convince lawmakers in the chamber that he has a path forward in this conflict?
Good morning. Good to be with you, Dan. Well, I think it's very important to give the other side of the story, and that is that Netanyahu's speech was praised by the overwhelming majority of people who watched it, whether in the United States or in Israel. It was a very, very powerful speech, as only Netanyahu knows how to give. He's probably the greatest orator of this century. And the big question is, beyond oratory, what was the content of the speech? What was the impact of the speech? And where does it leave us this morning? For those people who agree with everything that Netanyahu said, those people who know that that 40,000 level mark that Hamas puts out includes probably about 17,000 terrorists killed, including the Palestinians who have died of natural causes. So that number doesn't make the type of effect on Israelis that it does perhaps on some of your listeners. But what Israelis are divided on is particularly where Netanyahu was putting his emphasis, and that is we have to keep fighting against Hamas and trying to keep the pressure on Hamas to release the hostages. The hostage families say, okay, we've already inflicted enough damage on the Palestinians. Let's agree to basically end the war and get as many hostages back as possible. Netanyahu will say, by contrast, that if you don't continue the war to defeat Hamas, Hamas will simply emerge from the tunnels, it will rearm, regroup, reconquer Gaza, and stage another October 7th, as its leaders have repeatedly promised to do. And basically, by saving, say, 50 or 60 Israelis, you'll be jeopardizing the lives of thousands of Israelis down the line. And on top of all that, there's the question of releasing Palestinian terrorist prisoners from our jails, people who have killed Israelis. And so we know that they go back being terrorists. In fact, the head of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, was released in a 2011 prisoner release deal. So these are immensely complex situations and questions. And I can deeply empathize with the hostage families who want to seal right now. But I also empathize with the Israelis who say, we can't go back to our border areas unless terrorism is defeated. Another major issue, which wasn't mentioned in your report, is the northern part of the country, which is under constant artillery barrage from Hezbollah in the north. 80,000 Israelis rendered homeless, and they can't go home because another Iranian-backed group is basically rendering the northern part of the country uninhabitable, Dan. It's an extraordinarily complex and torturous situation. The major message of Netanyahu, and this is not surprising because this has been his theme since the 1990s, is Iran, which is the sponsor of Hamas, Hezbollah, and also the Houthi rebels who struck Israel last week, actually struck right up the street from where I'm speaking to you, in Iran, which is racing forward to create a nuclear weapon and calling on the United States and the free world, and particularly the Middle East, to organize against Iran. Will this have an impact? It'll have an impact, I think, on the people who are already convinced of that message. It will probably have not an impact on those people who either sat out yesterday's speech or didn't rise for standing ovations. Certainly not people protesting outside.
Right. Ambassador, I respect your view, of course, but let me just challenge it for a second, because the reaction inside Congress would also suggest that some lawmakers stateside thought it was a little bit rich that Netanyahu can come into Congress and make this historic address without a hostage deal and without a ceasefire on the table. He's prolonging this war for his own benefit, is he not?
Well, that's what his critics say, and that his supporters will say. Remember, keep in mind, Dan, I'm not a spokesman for the government, but I'm going to give you an analysis, and that is, as supporters will say, that's actually protecting the country. And yes, it's unbearable that hostages remain in the captivity of Hamas. And this is, if you listen to the testimonies of these freed prisoners, the torture they went through was just unspeakable. You can't even repeat it on the station. Yes, but you also have to think about Israel's security, that you cannot let Hamas come back and run Gaza. And the general feeling is that there are Arab countries who are willing to come in and help administer Gaza, but not if Hamas is still running the place. So you have to defeat Hamas. If you don't defeat Hamas, you don't defeat Hezbollah, you don't defeat Iran. So Netanyahu always has to balance that deep desire to see the hostages return home with the fact that this is a country that has to defend its borders and have to defend another 10 million people inside it. Extremely difficult. I think that there's a deal on the table, and the military establishment, defense establishment, has been urging Netanyahu to accept it. Even his own defense minister has been urging Netanyahu to accept it. The deal says that in return for a 6-week ceasefire, Hamas will release a certain number of hostages. We don't know how many just yet. Something in the area of 30, beginning with women, the infirm, the aged, if they are still alive. We just found 4 bodies this morning. It's not quite certain how many are alive. And if that happens, then go to maybe a second stage, which would be a permanent ceasefire. The big controversy here is over the second stage, not over the first stage.